What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 358. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me once again from the hotel bed, merely 3 feet from me, it's Luis Scott-Vargas.
Yeah, I've clipped the microphone to the bed so I can lie down.
In fact, I'm going to take a picture, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to post this on our Patreon feed. So if you're a patron, you get a chance to see a rare insider look at Luis. Oh, he made a good face too. So we're in Hawaii. That's the deal. We're here for the Pro Tour. And this episode of the show, of course, is where we get an insider look at Pro Tour testing. Luis is going to give us some insight into what Team ChannelFireball discovered through their limited testing.
I am, and we're actually filming in front of a live studio audience as Paul Chan is in the background finalizing his constructed deck.
Yeah, he's got about an hour to submit the deck, so...
It's a lot of hassle for a deck he's going to play like 2 rounds with, but it's still...
Come on!
So yeah, we're going to take a look at kind of like what we're thinking going into the Pro Tour. And I say we, but I'm actually not playing in this Pro Tour, so it'll be a little different. But I did prepare, especially in the limited portion, as if I were playing in the Pro Tour. I did a lot of drafts. I streamed them, which I guess I wouldn't have normally done were I playing in the Pro Tour, but did a lot of drafts, attended the limited meeting, got my mind in the right place for kind of what's going on in this format. It's a pretty sweet format.
Yeah, and I've been drafting a ton too. So
the draft leagues do make it a little bit
makes
easier.
It so much better. Yeah, they came out on Wednesday too, like we talked about last week. All right, before we get into all that though, I want to mention our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. We urge you to check them out for all of your Magic needs. That's right. If you need anything Magic related, they're going to have it for you. We're talking sealed product. We're talking singles. We're talking anything related. You know, you need some new playmat. You need a new sleeves, whatever. They're going to have it at Channel Fireball. They're going to give you fair prices. They're going to ship it out to you quickly, and they've got great customer service. You can also sell your cards back to Channel Fireball if you want. This happens all the time, especially for people that draft live a lot, is you end up with kind of a stack of rares that you've accumulated. And, you know, a lot of times you don't need them. They're not really doing anything, and you can package them up and send them to Channel Fireball. If you trade them in, they'll give you a 30% bonus, which I think is really the best way to do it. You can get new booster boxes or whatever to draft some more and kind of keep that chain going. And while you're there, check out some content from some of the best players in the world. It's all free, and it all has the same goal that this show does, which is, of course, to make you a better Magic player. Also, the Patreon. You can subscribe to the show via the Patreon. It's completely optional, but we certainly appreciate everybody that helps support us. It really does help keep the show moving and let us open up new doors and try new things. One of the things that you get to do if you're a patron, there's a lot of different bonus levels you can get. You can get an unedited version of the show, for example, which this one has it's going to have some pretty juicy stuff on it. But also, you can submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. So we've actually, I'm starting a new thing where I'm letting our patrons record their question and send it in if they'd like, or we can read it. It's kind of whichever one you want. And we've got a question here from Stuart Wyatt. So let's listen to that right now, Luis, and then we'll answer his question when we come back.
Hey Marshall, LSV, my name's Stuart. I've been listening since the Origins pre-release, though I started from episode 1, so while I feel like LSV is my actual co-host, I've always felt like a Luxosaurus man myself. My question has to do with motivation. When I started playing, my motivation to get better was spite, because I was playing with a bunch of jerks. Though when I got better, I felt myself falling off, and while I always seek to play tighter as a nuts and bolts spike, I sometimes lose motivation to improve myself as a player. So what motivates you guys to keep getting better, and to get to the point where you get 3 Pro Tour top 8s in a row? Marshall's motivation could help too. Thanks. Keep putting out great content.
Okay, so really funny, Stuart. Great stuff. Thanks. Throwing me under the bus.
I enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah. But what about his question? I thought that was very poignant.
It's actually an interesting thing, and something that I have certainly thought about. Like, what keeps you motivated is something you should always keep in mind, because you don't need a goal with every single thing you do, but knowing why you're playing or what your goals are going to be can be useful depending on what personality type you are. I'm always I'm a pretty competitive person, and so even though and it's kind of funny that this is actually the first show before a Pro Tour I'm not playing in, I still want to be the best Magic player I can be, because I enjoy playing Magic still, and I enjoy. I'm kind of competing with myself. Like I don't like making mistakes, and I don't like doing things poorly. I kind of just go all in on things. That's just my personality type. So even though it's like going to be more me streaming, maybe playing a random Grand Prix or something instead of playing in the Pro Tour, I still want to show up ready to game and ready to be kind of as prepared as I can be.
Yeah, speaking on motivation, it was interesting. You and I just got back from the Pro Tour Hall of Fame ceremony where, as it turns out, Owen Turtenwald and Yuya Watanabe were inducted into the Hall of Fame. And, I was really struck by Yuya's speech specifically. He said that, it was a great honor to get inducted into the Hall of Fame, but he made sure to mention in his speech that this was not going to deter him from his goal, which was to take home a PT trophy. He wants to win a Pro Tour. That is his motivation. And it's crazy because, I do think that there's something inherent in people, right? Because this guy has won basically everything else, and he literally just got inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is the highest honor you can get. It also means you're automatically qualified. So there's some pressure release there, you'd think, and he showed none. He actually made it a point to say in his speech, "This will not slow me down. I'm going to win a Pro Tour." That's just built in.
Yeah, I mean, again, to loop back to the coverage thing, part of the reason that I was interested in doing coverage is that my motivation did change. I mean, I didn't have a lot of goals that I wanted to achieve in terms of tournament results, but the fact that I'm doing coverage doesn't actually change where I want to be in terms of Magic preparation. So it's important to have goals. It's important to be motivated. And I think internal motivation, I've always found that the most effective. I've never said I need to win a Pro Tour, or I need to top 8 this many events, or I need to hit this level to be satisfied. It's more I don't want to show up and play poorly.
Yeah.
And more, I mean, the results do matter, but more than that, it's whether I'm internally satisfied. And that's not going to change. At least I don't think that's going to change whether or not I'm playing in the tournaments or not. And that's a lot of what I imagine drives people who are especially listening to a podcast about getting better, or people who are spending a lot of time each week drafting, is just, I think the healthiest is just competing with yourself. But that, again, this is the sort of thing that is internal. So
yeah, what
works for you may be very, very different. But at least from my own experiences, trying to, again, be as good as I can be is in and of itself a goal.
All right. Well, one of the other things for the Patreon is I'm doing a bunch of giveaways. I've got a bunch of cool stuff, including this one is going to be 2 sleeves, 2 LR branded sleeves, by the way, an LR deck box and a sticker. And this one is going to go out to Matt Weil from Antelope, California.
Antelope is near Sacramento, I believe.
It's also a lot like an elk. So congratulations, Matt. And I will be continuing similar giveaways as we go forward. Okay, let's do 2 things, actually. We're going to do a Crack-A-Pack, but I did want to mention one thing briefly before we do. Limited Resources survey.
Yes.
Our friend Garrett has put together another survey. You'll remember this from a little over a year ago or so. You and I had talked...
Yeah, it's closer to 2 years, actually.
Almost 2 years ago. We had talked at length about the results of that survey on the show. And we just wanted to mention, and I'll put it in the show notes, of course, that a new version of that survey is up, and we would appreciate it if you took a minute to fill it out. It's pretty quick, it's pretty concise, and it really does help us know who we're talking to, know what helps make the show better for you. So if you could take a moment to do that, again, I'll put the link to it in the show notes, and we do appreciate it. Crack-A-Pack.
Where is this pack from?
Oh, this was donated by listener Paul C. Thank you, Paul. I forgot to bring a pack, so Paul did generously donate this one. Okay. Oh, no. Geraldo.
Yeah, Herald of the Fair. And this is the first time I can actually see the Crack-A-Pack without you telling me. Herald of the Fair.
Do you want to do it?
Sure, yeah. I got to look through one of them because you forgot a pack, and I had a pack in front of me. Actually, the first Kaladesh Crack-A-Pack we did was...
You have the cards for me, right?
No, I actually forgot to.
Oh God! After all that talk on the last show,
I'll see you next week.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
We will be. You'll also forget. All right.
So, Herald of the Fair, the 3 mana, 3/2 gives creatures +1/+1 until end of turn when you play it. Not a card I'm looking to play in any deck. Sometimes you'll play it as a curve filler, but it's not a good card.
No, super filler.
High Tide Hermit is next, the 5-mana 4/4 crab with Defender, and you can pay 2 energy to make an attack. It gives you 4 energy.
And you get 4 energy, which is actually quite a bit.
Yeah, this is the kind of card you'll put more likely in a deck that wants the energy rather than the deck that wants the 4/4.
Right.
I mean, it's a playable card, but it's just not a very good one either.
Right, and of course we've talked about it a bunch, but that contested 5-drop slot as well.
Next up, we've got Attune with Ether, the green for a sorcery, search a library for basic land, reveal it, and get 2 energy.
This is one of the cards that I've seen the biggest delta on how people value it. Some people just think it's like shrug, you can play it if you want, and other people actively seek out this card.
I am kind of in between the two, where in a 2-color deck that doesn't particularly care about energy, this is just not a very good card. Once you hit 3 colors, once you care about energy, this becomes actually very desirable because it's an energy source that doesn't cost you a card slot. Because you can play, if you have something like 9 forests in your deck, you can just play an Attune or 2 and just play 1 or 2 fewer lands.
Yeah.
It just counts as a land.
Which is a big deal, yeah. And
so
of course
you're getting energy out of
splashes.
your lands. It also fixes your mana if you want to play 3 colors. So certainly it's a card I'd be taking right now, and it's actually one of the better green commons despite not being quite as good as like Thriving. Right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed about Attune with Ether is that I've actually been taking it earlier. The earlier I take it, the happier I am. And I mean, what I mean is earlier in the draft as a whole. Like, I want to have 1 or 2 of those, if I know I'm going to be in green, coming out of pack 1. And the reason for that is that it opens up the door for me to splash later, and I can really take a good gold card or a good splash card, where if you take the good splash card first and then just hope to peel an Attune with Ether, like, the person next to you could just value them very highly, or somebody else could be scooping them up, and then all of a sudden you've got dead picks that you can't use. But if you do kind of get it out of the way early and pick 1 or 2 of those up in the first pack, you have 2 full packs of splashable cards, which I think is pretty powerful options.
Definitely. Next up, we've got Subtle Strike. Give a creature -1/-1 until return and put a +1 counter on target creature.
Card's
for
good.
2 mana. Yeah, Subtle Strike's quite good. I would still open the draft with Attune for a lot of the reasons you said. Just it opens the doors for splashing. It's a very flexible card, but Subtle Strike is quite good.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got Inventor's Goggles, the 1-mana equipment. Gives a creature +1/+2 with equip 2, and whenever an Artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you can attach the goggles to it.
Better than it looked originally.
This is definitely a playable card.
It's a playable card.
In a deck that wants cheap artifacts, or a deck that has a bunch of Artificers, or both. It is certainly a card that I end up playing more often than not, especially the first copy, but I would put it at worse than Attune and actually worse than Subtle Strike.
I agree. Even though it's colorless, it's still generally not a high impact card.
Next up, we have Giant Spectacle, which is unfortunately not like a big pair of glasses.
Well, you did have the goggles right there.
That is true. It's 2 mana, 1 and a red for enchant creature. It gets +2/+1 and menace. A card some people say is integral to a super low to the ground aggro deck. It's also a card I'd not put in a deck and hope to never put in a deck.
I'm the same way right now, but I am interested in exploring the deck that actually plays that. And by super low to the ground, we're talking about like a 14 to 15 land deck that plays as many 1s, specifically 2s and 3s, with maybe just a 4-drop or 2 at the top end. And it is just looking to be all in, larger than life. This, Giant Spectacle, any of these cards, the Lookout is like a high pick in this deck. You're just trying to get them dead as soon as possible. Punish slow starts, slow decks that are trying to do too many cute things, mana stumbles, mulligans, all that kind of stuff. It's meant to just smash. And I know that people have been having success with it. And the couple of times that I've brushed up even near that territory, my deck has felt quite strong, but I have not gone as deep as Giant Spectacle as of yet. It's hard for me to play a card like that because it's so bad.
Yeah, you can punish decks that are just like durdling around doing nothing, but I still am not really sold.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got Impeccable Timing. 1 and a white instant. Deal 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. I really don't like this card very much.
I do. Why don't you like it?
I have just found it to not line up well against a lot of the cards in the format and not be a particularly good aggressive card, which kind of cuts off the decks that you can play it in.
That has not been my experience. Not that I think it's amazing. It's still very conditional removal, but I've just slotted it into the white decks that I've played and felt pretty good about it, almost whether I was trying to be the aggressor or not.
I just don't think it's good in an aggressive deck because it doesn't actually remove a blocker. It doesn't make it to block first. And then even in the control decks, frequently the cards I'm losing to are just not 3 toughness or less creatures. They're just cards like Wayward Giant or Gear Seeker.
Renegade Freighter doesn't beat you ever?
Renegade Freighter, it's good against that in particular. You have to kill it with Trigger on the stack.
But I picked the best possible example for my point.
I have been underimpressed or underwhelmed by impeccable timing. I think it's a playable card. The reason I don't really end up with it is because, and this is a funny thing that can happen, I take it at a lower level than most people do. So even if I would definitely be willing to play this card in a control deck. I'm not willing to third pick it, so I never see it because other people are.
Yep.
So I wouldn't take it here. I would still take a Tune with Ether in this pack.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Consulate Skygate, 2 mana for an 0/4 defender with reach. I do like this card. It's a good defensive card, but it's not one you should take early.
No, you don't need to.
Next up, we have Curio Vendor, 1 and a blue for a 2/1.
We're just lighting it up. Thanks for the pack, Paul.
No chance of playing it. This card, I think, is quite bad. You can side it in against a bunch of 3/2s. It's just not a good card.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Blossoming Defense is next. This is the card you took
Stop it.
first out of the first crack attack we did.
Why do we have to open this card all the time now?
It's 1 green mana for an instant, gives +2/+2, and gains hexproof.
I mean, I did take it first out of all combat tricks, so obviously I do like the card, but...
It's our first uncommon as well. Yeah, Blossoming Defense is good. It's a efficient card.
But a Tune with Ether is better, right?
I would open on a Tune.
I would too. Card is good, though.
Agreed. Next up, we have Consul's Shield Guard, 3 and a white for a 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy, and when it attacks, you can pay 1 energy to give another attacking creature indestructible.
This is one that I found interesting in discussions that I was privy to today, comparing it to Propeller Pioneer.
Yeah.
And I actually like Propeller Pioneer significantly more than this card, like, 1 notch up or whatever. And I found this card, like, medium. I think it's fine.
I think that was the general consensus as well. One of the big issues that we had as a team with this card was that there's so many 4-drops.
Yeah.
You're just not short on 4s. No. And this isn't anything special. Like, yeah, you'll play it. It'll be a fine card, but you're not taking it over anything particularly great. Next up, we have Diabolic Tutor, 2 black sorcery. Search your library for any card. So
very narrow.
You basically should
scenarios.
never play this card except if you do have like an insane bomb, like Noxious Gearhulk or Fumigate, a card that can especially get you back from behind. It is sometimes worth it, and it's like a good sideboard card for long game matchups, but still not a card you should really.
Well, and I mean, we should point out the reason that you're saying the card that you get should be able to get you out from behind is because
you spent a turn
behind.
Yeah, you spent a turn getting behind with Diabolic Tutor. Yeah. Our rare is Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Okay.
2 mana, 3/2, can't block. And you can pay 1 and a black, exile another creature from your graveyard, return it to the battlefield.
I find this card fascinating because the stats are obviously pumped, right? A 2 mana 3/2 is already pretty good. And if you can just keep jamming with it, you can even buy it back a few times, and that's pretty good too. But also, I really don't like cards that can't block like that. Oh, yeah. It only goes into certain decks.
Means that like a wide swath of decks just can't play the card.
Right. And so like if you take a card like this, you're probably going to be in black. You don't absolutely have to be, but like, in order to maximize it, you'd want to be in black, and then you want to be aggressive. But the good news is like black-red artifact aggro is a real deck. It's a very good deck, and this card slots in beautifully.
And you can have other black combinations that are aggressive as well.
But like let's say you're green-black, energy or stuff, whatever. Like this isn't that good in that deck. Right?
No, it's not. But I've had green-black ++1 counter decks that would just play this card and
it would.
Be with it.
Okay.
Yeah, you have enough like Doomed Operatives and Screechers that you just end up wanting to attack your opponent.
Yeah.
I like Scrap Heap Scrounger. I think I would take it over a Tune.
You would?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good. It's applicable in enough decks. It's also just, you can end up in like red-white aggro and just play the card.
Yes, you
can.
can.
2 mana 3/2. It is colorless even though it has a black activated ability.
Yeah, especially in those really low curve aggro decks.
So our last card is actually a foil, High Spire Artisan. 2 and a green for an 0/3 with Fabricate and Reach. Fabricate 1.
Well, where are you at on that? Because I came up on a little bit from last week. I kind of dig it.
It's better than I thought it was, but it's still not a card that I'm like in a hurry to pick up. But it just ticks a couple of boxes here where it adds an artifact for the decks that care about artifacts and adds a ++ counter for the decks that care about that. So the fact that it does both those things on a decent body is
close enough. Yeah, I think I would take a Tune with Ether myself
over Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the two are close.
Yeah,
I could definitely see opening on a Tune, but my inclination is to just Scrap Heap.
Yeah, it is colorless technically, and like you said, it can go in multiple colors of decks. I will put this somewhere where I won't forget it to bring it home and put it in our next giveaway for that. Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty here. We've got a bunch of information. You were testing with Team ChannelFireball for most of the week. You had the limited meeting today, which I had a chance to sit in on most of it, which was, by the way, I was in heaven. Like that was just awesome. I was in fly on the wall mode, like, because, I'm on the coverage team. I don't really want to get involved, but like just being able to listen to the discussions from the team this is, by the way, to explain to the listeners at home, it was very detailed discussion. This was like laying out all the commons and uncommons in each color and ranking them, grouping and ranking them together. And when you do that, you do end up with some type of a list at the end, which does tell you some things about the way that the people that made this list approach it. But much like when Luis and I do the set review, it's not really about the grade or the list at the end. It's about the discussions that happen in between and why things work, where they work, what context the cards are good in and what they're not. And all of that stuff gets discussed in this meeting. It was really sweet.
Yeah, I think it's our team at its best.
Yeah, you guys were.
This is when we're actually organized and know all our stuff and are just going through it.
Yeah, and you get to see you get to see some of the best limited players going, with different opinions, but like coming together to like say, well, this is what I think, without it degenerating into anything, no yelling matches or whatever. It was very
not this
clean.
time.
Yeah, everybody is on good behavior. But
it has happened before.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, that's just part of also being in the room with the same people for a week or whatever.
Definitely.
But anyway, this thing was fantastic. And there's a lot of takeaways, I think, that we can relay and also, just in the amount of drafts that I've done in the meantime. So I think we should start with big picture stuff. So let's talk about the colors. You and I have both been high on green since the set review. We were both very impressed by the commons and uncommons in green, and that hasn't really changed. They're just the most powerful cards.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When you do a set review, you'll look at just like, what do these cards look like kind of by themselves? You don't really have the full context yet. You don't really know how cards slot together.
Yeah.
And green just like was an obvious front runner. Turns out it is the obvious front runner. Mm-hmm. Green, I think, is the consensus best color. This isn't just among our team. It's just the card quality is just so high.
Yeah, and I mean you can do a curve like from 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 just made with commons. That's pretty darn impressive. You can go Seed Sculptor, Rhino, Outrider, Tiger. It's like you've just put up like a ton of trample.
The Cowl Prowler at 6 is just a fine card.
Yeah, and I was, and if you want to go to the uncommons, you can pump up those, all of a sudden you're playing Cubs and, these stupid cards.
Yeah, so green is not only the best color, but it also pairs well with almost all the other colors, and it has the option to go into a kind of like 3 to 5 color mode because of Attune with Ether and Wild Wander and then Prophetic Prism. So,
which is great, man. All of those cards enabling.
Well, it's just so strong
splashes.
Because what happens is if you open on green cards, first of all you're in a very, very strong deep color, so you'll end up in a 2-color combination that just has good cards. Second, you just have the opportunity to just nab those off-color welding sparks or whatever other bomb just gets passed your way and end up just taking advantage of whatever you see. Just the power of being able to take any card with like a single like let's say you're green black and you can just take a Restoration Gearsmith because you can splash white very easily. Like that the fact that it gives you this flexibility and power is part of why green is so good. So the color after green is, I think, not quite as clear cut.
Yeah, we have black and white kind of.
I would say both black and white are essentially equal. Like I prefer black a little bit more, but I think that it's close enough that black and white are just both very solid colors. They kind of slot into a bunch of different strategies, and that is a real strength. Like you can, the fact that you can first pick, revoke privileges or a tidy conclusion and still end up whether beat down or control is part of why black and white are a lot stronger than something like red, which we're going to get to. But, you first pick a welding sparks and you don't even know if you're playing red because red is so shallow. You almost prefer
to splash it or something.
Right. So it's interesting. The part of the strength too is that they just pair well with every other color. So like, I like black blue, I like black green, I like black red, and I like black white. And those are all fine decks to be.
Yeah, and they're all significantly different from each other. By the way, that is one thing we should mention about green as well, is that it does have multiple themes. It has just good cards.
Yeah.
It also has +1/+1 counter sub themes that you can take good advantage of with a few uncommons, and then it also is good at making energy. So you can kind of
the one thing I don't think green particularly supports is aggression. Which is why red green is my least favorite.
You just haven't been playing enough larger than lives.
Yeah. Well, it's not that green can't beat down. It's that it doesn't beat down with like 2-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop into pump spell very often. It's like green beats down with Pima Outriders and Reparing Tigers, which definitely can get the game over and get your opponent dead. It's just not a very low to the ground curve deck, which is why I like red-green the least of the green-based color combinations.
Now that leaves us with blue and red.
Yeah, so blue's another funny instance where...
You and I were pretty bummed out.
Looking at the set review, blue looked horrible.
Yeah.
It just like, what is its best common? Either Theorist. And it turns out like either Theorist and Gear Seeker Serpent are both actually really good.
They're good cards. Yeah.
And then you have Select for Inspection, which didn't look like anything particularly special, but ended up, I think, being just like a very, very good card in most blue decks.
Yeah, I think
just a 1-mana bounce spell with Scry 1. Scry 1 is pretty close to half a card. Like that is a significant advantage. So
yeah, and I've been high on bounce cards for a while now in lieu of cheap creature interaction, since we don't get that anymore for the most part, at least at instant speed. And this is just the latest iteration of that, and it turns out still good. Like it fills the role. Also, I have noticed that I've bounced my own creatures more than I thought I would. Like when we read the card in the set reviews, Select for Inspection, I just always viewed my opponent attacking me and me bouncing their creature, or them playing a trick and me bouncing their creature. But I have multiple times bounced my own creature, from number of different situations, malfunction or during an attack step or whatever.
Yeah, if your opponent tries to have impeccable timing, you could have even better timing.
Yeah.
So blue did overperform. I still think it's the 4th best color. So it's not like, blue's awesome, but it's not the worst color in my estimation. And I actually like some of the blue decks pretty well. So blue as kind of, this is actually not the first time it's happened. Just blue has good enough synergy cards that it just adds up to enough.
I feel like it's more a support color? Like it's
it is more of a
secondary
support color, yeah.
But, okay.
But it has the energy theme, and it has the Gear Seeker Serpent theme, which is like, heavy artifacts. And those two combined, they give blue some legs.
Now, what about red? You're down on red. You're hating red.
Yeah. So the problem with red is, besides Welding Sparks, it just doesn't have anything going on that isn't a beatdown deck. Like, it's got Built to Smash. I mean, that is a good card. It's got some mediocre creatures, and that really is it. It's just not a color that is very deep, and the thing it's doing, attacking, it doesn't have quite as much support as you would hope for. So you just lose so much flexibility by taking red cards early, because it's like, if you take a Built to Smash or you take a Thriving Grubs, like, there's just not that many directions you can go there, but you also don't have the power. It's not like red has 3 great 2-drops and 2 great removal spells that work in aggressive decks. It just has basically 1 removal spell, 1 pump spell that are good. And
yeah, like I want to bring that up. So you and I looked at Chandra's Pyrohelix and we thought, this is pretty good. You and I weren't super high on it, but we thought, well, this is a good card. Does it just not kill the things that you care about?
Yeah, it's kind of like why I don't like Impeccable Timing as much. It's like, look, you'll play both these cards. I'm not saying go ahead and cut Chandra's Pyrohelix from your deck. It just doesn't kill the cards you care about. The Thriving Rhino is just a gigantic beast. You just end up in a spot where, sure, sometimes you nab a Propeller Pioneer and the servo it makes. And yeah, that's a slight advantage. You spent 2 mana, they spent 4 mana. Still a 1-for-1. Sometimes your opponent just plays a Gear Seeker Serpent on turn 5, or plays a Bastion Mastodon, or a Prakata Pillar Bug, And I'm not naming cards that are really high picks.
No, those are all mediums, or some of them are high, but yeah.
And you're just going to end up lining up very poorly with what your opponent is doing. So, plus red is just not in the business of controlling the game very well. So, I'm pretty down on red. I think, it might use Renegade Freighter the best, and Renegade Freighter is one of the better commons, but it's still just not the kind of experience I want, where I first pick a red card and I just know that war's one direction open to me, and if I don't get there, then you either have to abandon red or end up with a very suboptimal deck. Like, your red-green mid-range deck is just not where you want to be.
Right. Talking about the best combinations for red: white, red, black, red.
Yeah, the 2 aggressive combinations are white, red, black, red are the 2 primary aggressive combinations. I mean, any 2 colors can be aggressive depending on the cards you get, but we're talking generalities here.
Yeah.
White, red doesn't even have to be vehicles. Like I mean, one of the points actually brought up today in the meeting was like, there's not really a distinction, at least in my mind, of red white vehicles and red white beatdown like Boros. It's just sometimes the red-white beatdown deck has vehicles in it.
Yeah.
You don't really need to worry about the identity there.
No,
and
you're playing the cards that care about vehicles, outside of like start your engines or whatever. But you're playing your veteran motorists in either of those versions.
Right. And so the red-white beatdown deck, just low curve, sometimes 16 lands, 2 drops, and then as many built to smash and built to last as you can get.
Yeah, those combat tricks are really, really important.
Yeah, they're your way to get an advantage, because first of all, you spend 1 mana on and kill something that costs more than 1 mana, ideally, and also just in practice. The other is that it just helps you punch through these 2/3s and 3/4s and 4/4s with your random 3/2s. So you need to be able to do that, otherwise you're gonna get brickwalled.
Yeah, and these combat tricks are really good. They're cheap. I mean, we're talking 1 mana. Both of them provide a significant toughness bump so that your creature often is going to survive. And then, if it happens to have evasion, trample, or whatever, you're going to get in for extra damage. But, you're look, in a situation where you're able to curve out enough to put your opponent in a situation where they need to keep tapping out to add into the board, but also have to block your attacks, that becomes a 1 mana removal spell. Now, they do get to block first in many scenarios, but sometimes they have to double block or something really good happens. And, your built to smashes and your built to last are going to really generate a lot of advantage for you. I've been very impressed by them.
So can we replay that? Your combat trick, these combat tricks are really good. I've been really impressed by them.
Yes, I do. I think they're very good. Where do you take them in the draft?
I would say above most of the other commons in those colors. Particularly built to smash, because red just has fewer cards that compete well with it. Yeah. I'm not taking built to last over, glint sleeve artisan or revoke privilege, but I will take it over a lot of the random 4-drops.
Like Propeller Pioneer?
I think you can take it over Propeller Pioneer once you're in that spot. Early in the draft, I would take Propeller Pioneer. Mm-hmm. It just goes more decks. Mm-hmm. But when you're already a red-white beatdown deck,
then you want to start loading up.
You can't get flooded on combat tricks. You can definitely get flooded on 4-drops.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. One of the combos that I've liked as well is red-green. You said you didn't really like it, but I actually do.
Red-green is one of my least favorite decks.
So why don't you like it?
I feel like the cards don't work all that well together.
Okay.
You do have this energy sub-theme, and...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not above grubbing it up.
I mean, I like grubbing in general, but I don't feel that green is getting enough from red. So
they're always heavy green decks.
Basically, the red-green decks that I've done well with are the ones that have either uncommons like Voltaic Brawler, or just 2 Welding Sparks, and you're just not playing more than 7 red cards in a lot of these decks. So sure, those decks are okay, but I feel like most of the time that you end up there, it's because you just took 2 good red cards early, and you have no other reason to be red.
Right, but they're primarily green decks, leveraging the good green creatures. But then, you do get some of the benefits of the red cards.
Just how often would these decks be better if they were just base green plus another color instead? And sometimes the answer is that, you should have just taken some other color.
That's true. Yeah,
I mean, not always. There's no color combination that I would say is completely undraftable in this set, but red-green is one of the ones that I end up in the least frequently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about inevitability.
I guess we have to.
Yeah,
that's how inevitability works. We just have to get around to it.
We have to get around to it at some point. So, we've been talking about aggressive decks here, right? The white-red, and then my favorite, the black-red, if I'm going to be aggressive. But then there's the other side of the coin when it comes to this format, which is you being able to do kind of crazy stuff, right? I mean, we're talking about long game plans that give you the ability. I think the way that I'd like to sum it up is to say that you have a place to keep putting mana sinks over and over again to generate board advantage or card advantage or whatever, and to eventually grind out a win. And this format does lend itself to that, right? There's definitely aggressive decks that will punish you for doing this. And, if they play a Renegade Freighter on turn 3 and have anything to back it up, you're going to be in huge trouble. But just because that exists doesn't mean that you shouldn't, draft these decks, because just as often as you end up playing against a deck that has a bunch of 2/3s and 3/4s and a much slower curve, or is trying to do their own goofy stuff, and instead you get to, try to push the game to this long game. And it becomes this interesting fight where it's who has the engine, right? Who has the repeated place to put mana and generate advantage. And there's a lot of them in the set. I mean, that's one thing that jumps out is, the modules is one of the things that we've been keeping our eye on. And those ones come out of the fabrication module. Seems to be one that you guys liked significantly. And then there's a bunch of rares as well that we've seen. We talked about Panharmonicon a bit last week. That's another one you can do. You can also do these blink decks that, let you replay creatures for value, either from your hand or just have them enter the battlefield again. All of these are viable strategies and can give you a way to power into the late game and overwhelm your opponent. What I wanted to know was if you had a feeling from the testing about which of these was the most desirable. Another one is an energy deck or whatever. This is going to be one of the things that we walk away from this format, right? Is that you are able to draft these decks, but which ones do I actually want to go for?
One of them is certainly like the 3+ color green deck. Where you take Prophetic Prism and Attune with Ether and Wild Wander, and that lets you play like a base green deck with something like 9 or 10 forests, and end up with like 3 or 4 cards that help you splash, and then you can play either like a secondary color or sometimes just like 2 or 3 other colors.
Yeah.
Like I've definitely had decks with like mana bases of like 9 forests, like 4 plains, a swamp, and a mountain. And then like 2 attunes. And that's like,
so you're heavy green with like a lot of other stuff going on.
Right. And that just lets you cherry pick from the packs the best cards out of each color. It's actually really terrible for people around you because they're like, all right, I cut off white. Now my payoff is that, I get past, the Fairgrounds Wardens or whatever. And you're just like, well, I opened a Fairgrounds Warden. I guess I'll just splash.
I'll just take it. Yeah.
Yes.
And then you're like, unlicensed disintegration. Sure.
And these decks are pretty high on nonsense because what they get to do besides play all the colors is they're not looking to close out the game really. So they get to skimp on win conditions and just play these like long game locks, like you're saying, that like just these mana sinks. You also just get to kill with like kind of sloppy cards, like the Accomplished Automatons of the world that are just like pay 7 to get this 5/7 and a 1/1 or a 6/8, and or go off with Fabrication Module and a bunch of energy cards, or use like Minister of Inquiries, the 1/2 that mills as just like a 7-turn clock that just sits there and your opponent has to deal with. So you end up in a spot where this green deck is just like a template, and it can slide in all the different kinds of long game plans that you're looking for. Another deck that I think we both like quite a bit is the like black-white deck. Yeah. That not the aggressive version. No. So that's a good deck too.
I really like that go wide deck, the Inspired Charger.
Yeah, and I want to talk about those in a second. But the black-white like blink value deck that is using Aviary Mechanic and Acrobatic Maneuver, and I mean you do want Restoration Gearsmith, but you can actually get by without it. There's enough Fabricate cards, like Weaponcraft Enthusiast is a big one. You can also end up with like even cards like Dukar Scavenger to get back some of your earlier cards.
I have used that card.
Yeah, Wisp-Weaver Angel is a big reason to get into the deck as well.
That's like the really, really good version of
and then again, you're just looking at killing your opponent with like accumulated card advantage. You're not even really worried about beating them down or anything like that. Like basically a good litmus test for these decks is, would you put a Renegade Freighter in your deck? And the answer to a lot of these decks is no. I would not play Renegade Freighter. So given you're not playing such a powerful card, like that just means your priority is not killing your opponent.
That's a really good line, by the way. That's the line in the sand, right? Yeah. You know where you stand. If you would not put a Renegade Freighter in your deck, you know exactly what you're trying to do.
Right, and a lot of these decks are just not looking to do that. So another deck on the Blink theme is like blue-white, which is I don't think going to be quite as common as white-black, because blue is less deep and it has fewer cards that synergize that way. Yeah. But
that's basically the Cloud Blazer deck, right? Yeah. Like that's the one
or
where
Experimental Aviator is a good one. Yeah. But Cloud Blazer is kind of like how you get into it. And actually, speaking of Cloud Blazer, one of the ways to get into a lot of these decks is just these gold cards.
Yes.
Like the gold cards.
Which we started the set review with those, remember? Yeah. And it is like those ended up being signposts for most of the decks, not all of them.
Not all of them. Hazardous Conditions
is still like what just happened there. Yeah.
But yeah, the Cloud Blazers and Restoration Gearsmiths like definitely point you in this direction. Voltaic Brawler, like these are cards that you can take early. They're good enough. Roller Virtuoso is great, though. That's a card I actually play in green decks pretty often. Yeah,
which is kind of funny. But that's not Roller Virtuoso's fault, right?
No. It's blame it on red. Yeah. But and these gold cards do give you the opportunity to see like, oh, okay, this is the color combination. This is what it's trying to do, and this is how I'm going to get into it. I guess the key with all of these like long game decks is that you need to make sure that what you're doing, if you're not trying to kill your opponent, is actually powerful enough to close. And that is a risk. Like a black-white deck that doesn't get any Gearsmiths and doesn't have Weaponcraft Enthusiast might actually end up in a spot where it's like, I can drag out the game, but I'm actually going to lose to their decoction module really badly because they're just going to sit there and generate energy and bounce their own creatures and replay them, and I'm just sitting there like, I'm up 2 cards, kind of, but, not actually close it out. So you need to make sure your long game engine is good.
That's the funny part, right? Is it like, if you're not going to be the Renegade Freighter side of that, equation, then you better be prepared to really outdo your opponent in the late game.
Yeah, and there's some impressive
it's not good enough. Yeah, it's just not good enough to be like you said, I'm up 2 cards, but they're 2 mediocre cards that don't actually win me the game or do anything. Your ideal scenario is you're either so much more powerful, which I think is what you were describing with the green-based, like 4-color decks, is that you just have opportunities to take so much more
4 or
awesome
5,
stuff.
premium removal spells. And all your creatures are high quality.
Where your opponent has 1 in their whole deck, Or you need repeatable engines, right? You need to be able to, like you said, the decoction module and just keep, replaying stuff or generating more and more board
something like Era of Innovation, Whirler Virtuoso in your like blue-green deck.
Yeah.
And that,
Can you explain that, by the way? That was one of the combos that we talked about in our
So Whirler Virtuoso, when you play it, you get 3 energy and you can spend 3 energy to make a Thopter. Era of Innovation says whenever an artifact or artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay 1 mana to get 2 energy. So if you have Era and Whirler Virtuoso out, you spend 3 energy, make a Thopter, pay 1 mana, and now you're back at 2 energy. So you're essentially paying 1 mana and 1 energy to make a Thopter. Yes. And which means with other energy cards, it stacks up very, very nicely. You can also, it's funny because this whole engine, I've gone off actually a bunch of different ways. Whirler Virtuoso is a great card for this. It's actually one of the better cards, even though you don't end up wanting to be blue-red. Because Decoction Module, for example, uncommon, 2 mana, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 energy. And then you can pay 4 and tap it to bounce one of your own creatures. But Decoction Module plus Whirler Virtuoso means you're paying 2 energy for a Thopter because you pay 3 and then get 1 back immediately. Decoction Module plus Era of Innovation plus Whirler Virtuoso means you're paying 1 mana to make a Thopter. Breaking even on energy, you're just paying 1 mana to make a Thopter. So that'll just kill your opponent really, really, really fast. So there's just a lot of outs to end up in spots where you're making just tons of Thopters for very, very low cost. And these are the kind of things that you're just going to run into. You're going to run into this kind of nonsense, or Fabrication Module, 3 mana, then whenever you get an energy, +1 counter on target creature, and then pay 4 and tap it and get an energy. In a deck, like a blue-green deck that just has a bunch of Thriving Turtles and cards like that, either Theorists, you're just going to play Fabrication Module, and then all of a sudden you're just going to stack up counters everywhere.
Yes.
And your opponent's just going to get run over. So there are a lot of nonsense combos. I say nonsense just because they do a lot of spinning their wheels, but making sure that you have the more powerful ones is important. And what that also means is that if you build I've got this black-white grindy late game deck, it's got Restoration Gearsmith, it's got Mechanic, it's got Acrobatic Mover, it's got Whisper, it's got all the cards I want, but I'm playing against a Whirler Virtuoso Era of Innovation deck, and they're not trying to kill my stuff, so all my Gearsmith type effects don't do anything. They're not really trying to attack me, so my good defensive features don't matter. You have to figure out a way to deal with that, whether that means removal for the problematic cards,
or changing the way your deck works,
changing the way your deck works, and sliding into a more aggressive deck. And that's part of the appeal with the aggressive decks is if you're playing a deck that's trying to get to turn 15, but your opponent's deck is doing the same and has a more robust engine, then you're going to put yourself in a really tough spot.
Right, and it can often be difficult to make that change. It's hard to change that deck into an aggressive deck in many scenarios, where if you are just the aggressive deck, you know exactly what your role is. It's very unlikely to change. You just go.
So and then you end up in a spot where you want to make sure that you have, I guess, the appropriate speed level to deal with your opponent, whether that means going under them or going over them. Right. Speaking of aggressive decks, I actually wanted to mention the Go Wide deck. That's another topic where it's either white-black or white-green are the 2 decks, and because white has the bulk of the good Fabricate cards and Inspired Charge. Those are both really key components. The deck's pretty simple. It is trying to go wide. It is trying to make it so Inspired Charge, giving all your attacking creatures, or all your creatures rather, +2/+1, is good, and that just means you want to make a lot of servos, and you want to blink your Fabricate cards, and you want to play Aviary Mechanic to return your Weaponcraft Enthusiast, and you want to get 5 or 6 creatures into play, attack your opponent with everything, and cast
Inspired Charge.
Inspired Charge. Though Engineered Might, the white, green, gold card also kind of fills the same role.
Yeah, I've been drafting this deck actually quite a bit. I drafted it 2 times online and once at a local shop. Similar builds for the last 2 that I've done. Very powerful. I had 2 Weaponcraft Enthusiast, and in one of them I had 2 Visionary Augmenter. And then in the other one I had 2 Enthusiast and 1 Augmenter. And I ran 2 and 3 copies of Inspired Charge in those decks respectively. I felt like it was the best card in the deck. It was like my main way to win. And I got to say, when you play the deck and it does what it's trying to do, it just doesn't feel like your opponent really has a way to stop it. Racing that type of deck is incredibly difficult because if they just tap out or leave themselves blockerless, you can pile on tons of damage in a short period of time. And I had it also multiple times where my opponent had one very large threat, and I was able to just chump block it a couple of turns because you have 6 or 7 creatures pretty quickly. And if I just drew one more creature that made any number of servos, you could just attack with everything the next turn, get your opponent from 20 to 0 with an Inspired Charge. Like, you can do that much damage in one hit with this type of deck. And I also found it to be quite consistent. I was able to build out boards consistently and then just wait until I had Inspired Charge, because just by the nature of Magic as, being a defending player, it's very difficult to attack into a lot. And like I said, you get these extra cards like Doomed Operatives and stuff too that just make it difficult for your opponent to attack into you because they so often get the bonus. And then boom, the one hit, you just get them. Make Obsolete is an issue.
Yeah, that card is a potent sideboard card. It actually reminds me of one of the kind of features of this format, since we had it above most like mid-range playables. So you're gonna take it above the like Vault Brokers of the world, above the Ambitious Etherborns, the kind of cards that are like fairly replaceable, Rush of Vitality. Even though you're gonna want to start it in your sideboard, and the reason for that is, and this impacts a bunch of your other picks too, this format's really deep on playables.
Yes.
You're never going to end up with
That's a great
19 playables. So you can take cards like Make Obsolete for your sideboard. You can take cards that are like, Era of Innovation, which sometimes you'll take Era of Innovation, it'll be the best card in your deck. Sometimes you just won't be able to play it. You'll be blue, you will not have this card in your deck. So you're allowed to take these like cards that are of unclear payoffs.
Yeah, we call them high risk, high reward, right?
And the reason you're able to do that is this isn't a format that's starved for playables. So,
yeah, because you're just not punished for that pick as hard as you would be in some formats.
Yeah, you're going to take these cards, and then you're going to find out if they work out, and if they don't work out, you just leave them in your sideboard, and you just move on. And you still end up...
you've given up something. I mean, it's not free, but it's just that there are formats where like you can get crippled.
Yeah, there's formats where you can't take a card that's either going to be like a 2 or an 8, and you just have to take the card that's 6, but this is not one of those formats. This is a format where I'm happy taking a card that has the capability of being 8 or 9, even though some of the times it ends up as a 2 or a 3 and I just don't play it, or a card that's even a sideboard card that's just going to be a 10 after board.
Right. These are some of the best, like these type of formats are the most fun to draft too, because like you always have hope.
Yeah.
Right. You could take the solid card that like attacks and blocks, but you take an Era of Innovation, pack one, pick one, and just go, okay, are we doing it? Like, there's some tension there until you figure out whether you're doing it or not, which is really fun.
So one of the things that also differentiates this format from others is, you remember last Pro Tour Eldritch Moon, I came into the Pro Tour saying like, I really, I like, blue-green Emerge a lot, and I like drafting red-green, and there's just not that many different decks I really like. This format is not like that. This format, like, again, you look at the 10 color pairs with like 5 color green being almost an additional one. There's no color pair that I'm just like, I'm not going to draft this, except maybe blue-red. Blue-red, I think, is the worst by like a pretty significant margin. But for the most part, you just have to like try to figure out what's open, try to figure out which direction you're supposed to be, and don't really rule anything out. And I think that's the sign of a good format. Like this format does have a lot of really bomby rares, more than the average format. And I tend not to talk
about that too.
Tend not to like formats like that, but like I do like that. Red might be terrible, but the color pairs in general are all fairly open. And yeah, I'm not going to be red black as often as I'm going to be something like blue green, but I still think both those color combinations are great. So there's not much I can point you towards as like, here's what I'd be looking to draft. It's more like know how all the decks work, and if some speak to you more than others, then maybe you lean into those decks a little bit. Like if you know that you really like the go wide type strategies or the aggressive, vehicle-based strategies, it's fine if you kind of tick up all the cards that go in those decks just like a slight amount, because like I don't think you're going to get punished for that here.
I have a couple of more points I wanted to talk. I want to go over a couple of underrated cards, or a few underrated types of cards, and then I do want to talk about the rares, the mythics and that kind of stuff. So we'll end on that one. Let's talk about the underrated cards. First one we've already covered, but I did want to bring it up, is the combat tricks, right? Yeah. Especially the 1-mana ones.
To be clear, you, Marshall,
yes,
are saying combat tricks are underrated
in this set. Currently.
By you specifically.
No, not by me. I properly.
And combat tricks are great, and you don't regret first picking them.
All right. Well, I think that they're. God damn. Look. I do find that specifically the 1-mana combat tricks, the Built to Smash and Built to Last,
Blossoming Defense
is very good too. Have overperformed relative to where most people pick them.
And Subtle Strike too. Subtle Strike's half a combat trick, half a removal spell, but it also has overperformed.
But even what's it called?
Rush of Vitality.
Vitality has been really good.
Yeah, it's one of the ways for like black-green to just not fall too far behind.
Yeah.
Rush of Vitality, a Cowl Prowler, you're really living the life.
Yeah, you're doing it. Yeah, it's. I mean, we did talk about it during the set review too. That like in between, you teasing me about, not giving combat tricks like B pluses or whatever. We also noted that these were all good. Like none of these combat tricks are the kind where you're like, haha, you don't play that. That we're all like, well, that's actually kind of reasonable. And that's actually kind of, and it turns out they all play out pretty. I mean,
instead of Rush of Adrenaline, right? +2/+1 in trample, you have 1 red mana for +3/+3 in trample.
Yeah.
And it's a big difference.
When you're attacking that's a big game. Prophetic Prism.
Yeah, Prophetic Prism is.
Like, are we just going to start first picking this at some point?
I'm not going to
how
first
high does
pick
it go?
this card, but I think if you take a Prism like third pick, you should not feel bad about yourself.
God,
Prism does like
so good about
4
myself.
different things that are great. First of all, it fixes your mana. Even in a 2-color deck, it makes your mana a little bit better. It does, at a very low opportunity cost. Second of all, it lets you splash a third color. Like, you normally don't have the option to, like if you're playing blue-white and you want to splash a black card, you can't just play 8 plains, 7 islands, and 3 swamps. That's just not a functional mana base. No. You're just asking for trouble. On the other hand, if you just have 2 Prophetic Prisms and you can play something like, 8/7/1 or 8/7 or 7/7/2, you're going to end up in a great spot. Like you can even, and that's even with 16 lands. You can also play a 17th land.
Sure.
The other thing is that it counts as an artifact. So
I actually wanted to mention on the splashing too. In the green decks that we mentioned, you get Attune with Ether, the Wild Wanderer, and the Prophetic Prism. The Prism's especially important because it actually does allow these multiple colored splashes too.
Right.
If you have an Attune with Ether, you're like, okay, I'm going to go get my Mountain in case I draw my, unlicensed, my Welding Sparks. But that means that the blue card that you're splashing, you don't have access to if you happen to draw that, but Prism just shorts that up. Okay.
It definitely does that. The other thing is it counts as an artifact. You've got your Doomed Operatives that really just need an artifact in play. So it enables a bunch of different black cards that really, really do want that. Counts as an artifact for Gear Seeker Servant as well. And then it also gives you like a card that smooths out your draws just in general.
For relatively cheap and colorless and doesn't need a target and all that. 2 mana is a little
the cost
much,
is speed.
It is.
You're not going to put this in your red-white aggro deck.
Right.
But I would say most decks should just play Prophetic Prism if they have it. And so that all that added together means it should be a high pick.
Dukara Scavenger was one that we mentioned briefly earlier. We didn't like it in the set review because it doesn't draw a card from the graveyard. Instead, it puts it on top of your library, which isn't, card advantage. But it turns out that this set is so jam-packed with when this enters the battlefield effects that you can so often regenerate that value. And, the question I asked myself when I cast it is, if I could, would I want to top deck one of these cards in my graveyard? And so often it was like Restoration Gearsmith. Hell yeah, I do. I'll put that, that would be a great draw. I'll put it on top of my library. Or even just like a 4 or 5 drop, that lets you just make sure that you're going to draw a spell and get some action going. And it turns out 4/6 is big.
So I would actually put the Scavenger in the same category as Bastion Mastodon, Confident Automaton, Cowl Prowler, Wayward Giant. These are all cards we gave relatively low marks in the set review because they look just kind of big and dorky. Turns out Big and Dorky is actually good enough in this format. These are all cards that I'm not unhappy when I put in my deck now, which is definitely better than what I expected.
Yeah, Bastion Mastodon stands out to me that way too. It's funny because like it's clearly not a great card, but every time it's on the board, I'm like, this just matters. Like
Thornhead Wolves is just terrible in Shadows over Innistrad. You just did not want that card in your deck very often. Turns out Bastion Mastodon is just like pretty good.
Yeah, it actually is just pretty good.
It lines up well with the format. It's an artifact for them that matters, and it can gain vigilance. Like it just does all these different things.
Yeah, I always get annoyed by it because my Oval Chase Daredevils always end up staring it down, and I'm just like, this is just really annoying. And that's a pretty big compliment for like a colorless common. All right, before we wrap up, I want to do some takeaways after, but I did want to get your thoughts on the Mythics thing because I think this is an interesting big picture discussion for most limited sets. You know, talking about Eldritch Moon didn't really have the reputation for being a
Shadows
deck.
didn't either.
And same with Shadows. You know, the one that stands out in recent memory was Fate Reforged. You know, as one that had particularly egregious rares and mythic rares that were difficult to interact with.
Counting all the like first pick slam rares plus the like top 4 uncommons are also just first pick slams. It was something like 40% of packs had a card of that caliber that you first pick, which means if you ever first pick a common in Fate Reforged, you felt like you were just like destroyed,
wrecked.
The next person over is just getting an outpost siege, and, you know, or pyrotechnics, and you know, and you're sitting there just like, I'm first picking a Sandstep Outcast.
Yeah, solid playable or whatever. Yeah, but I did want to bring that discussion here to the present, right? And take a look at Kaladesh, because one of the things that jumps out to you if you look at the rares and mythic rares is that there's an entire cycle of bomb mythic rares with the gear hooks, and those aren't the only really good cards, and not all of them fit the super bomb category, but enough of them are first pickable and definitely really good cards, and some of them are just absurd, right? The green and the black one to me stand out as just crazy good, and the white one's great too. Same with the blue one, I like that one a lot. And the red one's the only one I think that isn't just like, you know, absurd, and it's still very good. And then there's some other cards in the set too. You know, the Angel of Invention is one that jumps to mind.
Sky Sovereign, Console Flagship.
Yeah, colorless
Confiscation
Coup. Confiscation Coup is insane.
There are, you know, Smuggler's Copter.
Yep.
Which I think might actually be constructed playable too, as possible. And what that means besides just being an observation, it's you know, it's fine to just observe this and say like, hey, this just set's got a lot of kind of bomb rares. Yeah. What that means is, first of all, it means if you're first picking a common, you feel like you're a little behind on the 8 ball, which kind of sucks. Second of all, what it means is you want good sideboard cards against these cards. You know, you have Ceremonious Rejection, you have Revolutionary Rebuff, you have Appetite for the Unnatural, which these are all kind of the kind of cards that help deal with bombs. The other is that if you don't have a legit late game, aggro is actually just going to be a lot better for you, because it's just like one of the main, you know, through line with these bombs is they cost 5 or more mana. There's just, you know, Smuggler's Copter aside, there's just not that many bombs that cost 2 mana, just because it's really hard to end up with a balanced card that's also a bomb at 2 mana. And
right.
Not even necessarily saying Smuggler's Copter is a balanced card. So you end up wanting decks that can kill your opponent before they play their Torrential Gearhulk.
I wonder if, you know, it's weird because it doesn't feel early in the format for us, at least not for me. I mean, we've done
we've done a lot of drafts.
Ton of drafts. I've already commentated an
like
entire
we both have
tournament.
like a decent amount of trophies. One of us has more, but
and you know, but that being said, I think that, you know, since it is still relatively early in the format for most people playing, you know, a lot of our listeners will have done a draft or two by now at their local store, fired up a league. I'm actually pretty partial to playing aggressive decks at this point. I just think the logic holds that as the format develops, we'll have a much better idea of which of the color pairs and strategies are really, really good for the late game. While there's going to be some of them that seem good but don't hold up, they end up being too fragile or inconsistent. And figuring those out when you don't have a lot of drafts under your belt yet is tricky business. There's a lot of work to do. I mean, I'm still, you know, I'm 15, 18 just Magic Online drafts in at this point.
I thought you were going to say you're 15, 18 lunar rating right now on Magic Online. I'm like, wow, these drafts have just not been going well.
Jesus. No trophies, low limited rating. But, you know.
It's like a regular Cheon over here.
Whoa, Luis almost just had something thrown at him, and it wasn't even from me. But you know, that's a lot of work to get through, right? Like these decks are tricky and difficult to figure out. Where if you just draft a lean and mean aggro deck and kind of put it on your opponent to say, hey, which one of these, you know, module decks do you have? Are you going to spend 4 mana on? You know, we saw at the GP a player play a Prophetic Prism and a Panharmonicon and just get smashed that game because his opponent was playing, you know, Giant Spectacle and just turning cards sideways and just being like, I'm sure you're going to do really cool stuff in 3 turns, but you're just going to be dead, you know? And like, I kind of like that strategy for the early stages just because this format is complex. It's like, we can't just give you the keys. You know, when we did Eldritch Moon, we both liked the Emerge deck. It ended up being one of the best decks, I think, in the format, and certainly my favorite to draft even over the long run. But, you know, we had a beat on that early. I think a lot of people did.
We like blue-green, we like blue-red, and we like red-green. And just like,
yeah,
those ended up being among the best decks in the format.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of a bunch of the color pairs.
Right. And we also, and at that point, like, we had the tools in place to know how to draft those decks, even though those were next level decks, right? Those weren't just like basic stuff. Like, you needed to know what the key cards were. But here, it's much harder. Like, I'm still figuring it all out.
I tried to rule out color pairs, I just wasn't able to.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, oh, look, all these color pairs are good.
Yeah. And so, you know, if it were me and you know, if I was going to play in a GP or something or a local tournament and I found myself in a draft and I didn't know the more complex decks, I probably would be leaning towards aggro. I think that's something that you should consider as well. Okay, let's call it a show, Luis. Good stuff. You know, again, being in that limited meeting was fantastic, and hopefully that's something that can happen again sometime. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. It has links to everything that we do. Luis's stream, my stream, the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, all of the stuff, the LR subreddit, it's all there at lrcast.com right on the front page. I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by ChannelFireball.com. Please do check out their site. They really are a big part of what makes Limited Resources possible. And, you know, we love being sponsored by them. You know, they share a lot of the same values that we do as far as fostering a community and helping the community grow, as well as, in our case, improve at Magic. And you can see that. If you go to CFB, you're going to see, again, articles, podcasts, videos from some of the best players in the world, all showcasing their insider information and their talent and their knowledge for you so that you can improve. And, you know, that's what we're all about here on LR. We know that that's why you come to hang out with us every week. And you can get a lot of that at channelfireball.com. And of course, while you're there, you can, you know, they've got a great store there with fully stocked singles, sealed product, and all that other stuff. So channelfireball.com, please do check them out. That will do it for the show this week. We've got another GP next weekend, you and I, Luis, but we're going to find out a day somewhere in there to record next week, and we'll talk to you then. See you then.
So I don't know why it came to me today, but I decided that...
Are you going to dance for us?
I'm not. I actually already did that.
I know.
At
that's
the Hall of Fame
induction. You had all that practice.
I was dragged on stage to do a hula dance, but I did a pretty good job, I would say.
Well, I've got a video of it.
Pretty good job of me embarrassing myself. No, but for whatever reason, the thought Unbidden came to my mind of one of the worst decks I've ever played and the Grand Prix experience that came along with it.
Is this constructed or limited?
It is constructed.
Okay. So you had it full knowledge going in?
Even if that's allowed for me to talk about here.
So of course.
This was the first foreign Grand Prix that I attended.
Paul's shaking his head. Paul, why are you shaking your head?
If actually,
I built the deck.
So this is just a Paul dagger?
Well, not exactly. Let's let the story unfold.
All right.
So Paul and I, this is our first year. We're trying to get on the train. We find ourselves in a position where we have a good amount of pro points, but not quite enough to hit platinum. Essentially, the levels were all slightly different back then, but the platinum was...
This was level 8 and down?
Yes, level 7 and level 8, which not good branding. Platinum is much better branding.
Yeah.
So we decided, this is also when there were fewer GPs. We wanted to go to Poland, Krakow specifically.
Okay.
There was a GP in Krakow, a standard Grand Prix, and it would give us, if we did well, a couple extra points maybe that it looked like we were going to need, coming into the last stretch of the tournaments. So we decided we're going to go there. And first of all, I didn't really think the whole plan through. I get on the plane from California wearing shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt. I get off the plane on the tarmac in Krakow, and it's like 20 degrees out. And I didn't even bring a jacket. Look, I was a little looser back then. Paul had to lend me a jacket, which it worked out pretty well, but the problem is that it was a little tight around the biceps. But, other than that, the jacket, was fine. So we show up, we decide to play a deck based around the Vesuvian Shapeshifter Brine Elemental lock, which is a lock where if you unmorph Brine Elemental, your opponent skips their next untap step, and then if you unmorph Shapeshifter, you can copy it, make them skip their next untap step, and then next turn put the Shapeshifter face down again. That's what the card did.
And then do it again. This was called Pickles?
Pickles,
is that right?
Brine Elemental, Brine, Pickles, etc. But our innovation, our twist, brought up by Paul, was to add white.
You agreed to this.
Was to add white for Wrath of God. And we also added Phyrexian Ironfoot. It's a 3-mana, 3/4 creature, and it does not untap.
Okay.
And you can pay 1 colorless and 1 snow mana to untap it. And we just played a bunch of snow-covered islands.
But it doesn't enter tapped?
No, it does not enter tapped.
So it's a good blocker.
It was a 3-mana, 3/4. This is a long time ago. Back then, 3-mana, 3/4 was actually like good stats.
Okay.
Now you play 3-mana, 6/6, and you're just like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah.
So we put Wrath of God in our like 22 creatures.
Paul,
we play the tournament. I get the 1 pro point I ended up needing. I ended up hitting my level exactly, so I get 1 pro point. Paul wins the Grand Prix.
You won the GP, Paul?
I did.
Paul,
beating 2 mono blue decks in the top 4 and the finals with my Wrath of God deck.
so Paul wins the GP, and it's great. We're like, yeah, this foreign Grand Prix trip was a success. Then we fly back, except the thing is, I had booked both of our return tickets, and we weren't flying to the same place because at this point we didn't live together anymore. And I had booked Paul with a 3-hour layover on the way back. See, the thing is,
Paul's shaking his head.
I didn't look at the AM and PM signs. So what I thought was a 3-hour layover was actually a 15-hour layover. And it wasn't like a 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. layover. It was like an 8 p.m. to noon layover.
Oh my god.
I almost missed my flight because I fell asleep in the airport.
That is a nightmare.
So the only reason I'm not dead right now is because Paul won the Grand Prix. So even though he had this miserable 15-hour layover with, like in Frankfurt or something with like no nothing to drink, nothing to eat, he won the Grand Prix. He had the beautiful trophy.
He was snuggled with this trophy on some park bench in the middle of the airport.
That's exactly what happened.
And to console himself. But overall, our Grand Prix trip was a success. Even though it feels like we could have been slightly more prepared, both in terms of decks, apparel, flight schedules. Also, really all of that was my fault. But still, great success.
Do you have any regrets, Paul?
I mean, I wish I booked my own flight.